So the year is 1345, Elined verch Cyngen. You've been under the tutelage of your sire, Vilanus de More, for several years, learning quickly to adapt to his new code of ethics and eschewing your old morality quite rapidly. It was not long after your successful transition that you were whisked away from your home of Anglesey to the south, to the city of Bristol in the county of Somerset. You found Vilanus to be a fairly pragmatic man overall. He's very easy to learn from. He seems very fair in most things, but reticent to talk about himself very often. Vilanus introduces you to your brother in blood, Guy Basset, who styles himself a scholarly priest, but you intuit him as more underhanded and self-serving, with very little in the way of clergy influence and more ownership over a few businesses and financial interests in Bristol. So you are brought to the court of Bristol for your formal presentation to the prince in 1348, and you meet Kincaid, the Prince of Bristol, and two of his companions, Emmanuel and Aethra. Of course, a number of other Cainites attend the presentation as well, but they do not very much engage you at this time. How does Elined go about presenting herself to the court of Bristol and to Kincaid?
Well, she would keep her manners in mind and smile, be polite, always, if anyone's speaking, always make sure to give her full attention to the highest ranking person speaking in the room as to not offend them.
Go ahead and roll your... Go with manipulation etiquette, standard difficulty.
That's 0.
It's not a botch. It just doesn't seem to very much impress anyone. You're taken as a rank neonate, maybe a fledgling by some.
Yeah, they've probably seen a lot of fledglings try to do this kind of thing.
It's not very surprising. Kincaid doesn't seem insulted, he's just not very impressed by Vilanus' choice. Although he didn't seem very impressed or very much paying attention to much when you are presented. Although you have not met many Cainites, Kincaid seems a bit eccentric, even in your short time. When you're presented outdoors at the courtyard of his manor, the space is quite large, but it's dominated by a very large apple tree with low-hanging branches. And the entire time you're being formally presented and you're trying to do your best, he seems more focused on harvesting the apples as he's listening to you and your sire go on. His two companions, Emmanuel and Aethra, are standoffish and aloof. Although Aethra behaves very familiar with Emmanuel, hanging on his arm most of the night. They don't really engage with anyone, or you. Finally, at the end of this presentation, Kincaid does turn to you after you try to present yourself with the utmost etiquette. And he turns to you with a basket full of these ripe ruby red apples, the most exquisite you've ever seen, as he speaks up for the first time, coming close to you. Any friend of Elined verch is a most welcome guest at my estate, my lady. Perhaps you shall join me at one of my banquets in the future. And he smiles softly to you with thin, pale lips, and he hands you the basket of apples.
She takes it and does a slight bow and says, "Thank you very much, my liege. It is, of course, an honor to be here."
You notice your sire, Villanis. He smiles approvingly, kind of coming up beside you and nods as he joins in. Yes, perhaps one night. Many thanks, my prince, for allowing Elined to reside in Bristol. And he bows deeply. The two of you leave shortly after, but that same evening your sire pulls you aside when the two of you are alone at his haven. Elined, for your own sake, you must never attend any of his galas or feasts, or set foot inside his manor without me present. Is that understood?
She nods, but looks a bit puzzled and asks, "May I ask as to why?"
He paces around a bit and then looks back up to you at your question. While he is our ally, Kincaid is the most queer sort of bedfellow. Things happen at his manse. People disappear. Usually just kind, but... His voice trails off. Those two with him. Did you notice them? Ethra and Emmanuel.
Yes, I did notice them. They seemed a bit, in their own world, so to speak.
They weren't always so reclusive and insular. They were neonates that came to the city many years ago, together. Kincaid invited them to a number of his galas and salons, and then one night, after All Hallows' Eve, they just disappeared. For 10 years. And then they reappeared at court with him as though nothing had happened. But different. And they have havened with him ever since, for decades now. It's where they leave.
Understood. I will refrain from attending these events.
He nods, folding his arms. This is the most emotion you think you've seen on your sire. I dare not ask what skeletons he keeps in his closet. I'd just as soon ever find out. He is a powerful ally to have, but he is a viper. And better to have a viper on your side than at your throat.
She nods in full agreement of this.
The two of you do not very much speak of him again as time progresses. You find your niche in Bristol. Go ahead and describe to me what Elined would plan to do with some freedom in this city over the next 20 years or so.
Well, her main niche, so to speak, is gathering information and tactics, so she would like to further her own knowledge in the field of tactics, as well as, well, gain information as to the goings-on in this city. After all, going around completely blind of such things would be entirely foolish.
Alright, we'll start with learning of tactics. Do you have an idea of how you want to go about that? Do you try and socialize to learn who you might learn from, or ask your sire, or do you try and find books to read? What is your general idea there?
Her first and foremost, of course they're setting off fireworks now, why aren't they? Sorry about that.
I can't hear them, so you're fine.
No, my worry is that the dog's gonna start barking.
Ah.
But she would go and, go through books, since her sire has been so gracious as to teach her to read.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We could start there. You are more or less open to his study and library at his own home in Bristol. And he does have a few choice pieces on military treaties, although he's no general himself. It's mostly more of a, an interested collector than a concentrated volume or section on military acumen or theories. But there is some you could learn through this. Go ahead and roll an intelligence academics, and we'll go with standard difficulty on this.
And I do have my specialty in tactics.
Mm-hmm.
Do 10s double in your game?
Yes, they do. So that is going to be 7 successes. That's a wild success. Even with what little, I wouldn't say what little, but with the selection you have at your sire's disposal, you go through a good number of these tomes over a couple years and rapidly learn of many of the mistakes that generals have made in the past in failing to consider their terrain and the tactics of their enemies. And you become almost a self-styled commander in your own right, playing out some of these. You've become very familiar with modern, for this age, modern tactics and modern warfare. There are other studies, there are other sources of similar texts and scrolls and books, although you'd have to go to either the clergy, because they have most of it, or perhaps inquire into some of the Cainites. So maybe we can segue over to you're trying to gain information on the goings-on of the town.
Less asking and more keeping an eye out, seeing what she comes across.
Okay. Let me look through my notes on the people in this town. So more noticing what you come across.
After all, if you go around asking about people, eventually word's gonna get around that you're asking about people.
Yeah, it's not
necessarily polite.
not well looked at, no. I'm just looking over some of the characters to remind myself of who's doing what in this town. So you're not inquiring, more just trying to be a passive observer in like Elysium or court?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's what she did at her job, was being a passive observer, and that has gotten her fairly far in the... Well, not so much far as it got her from working beneath the stairs, so to speak.
Go ahead and roll a perception investigation, standard difficulty. The more successes, the more you'll learn of who's doing what and who is, what they're about. We can go from there.
Does detail-oriented work for this?
I would say yes.
Well, I mean, the etiquette roll didn't work, but the rest seemed to be going phenomenally.
Yeah, you're doing very well in this town in learning who's who and what's what. So I would say with that, you know all the major players in this city and the notable highlights about them. We'll start with Montreal, the Nosferatu sheriff. You know that he docks under the port of Bristol, and he is in charge of making sure peace is in order. He is rarely seen in Elysium, if ever at all, but he seems to keep a close eye on the city all the same. Let's see. You have picked up that he seems a bit bitter about how Nosferatu are treated in general, not just in this city, but in England and perhaps the greater areas of Europe. He seems to have some resentment about that. You learn about the Ventru, Alfonso di Bologna. He seems to be of Italian descent, perhaps once a merchant, or perhaps still a merchant, but not a very successful one. Let's see. He seems to be trying to work his way into the growing, the still modest and humble port business of Bristol, but he's not having a great deal of success. You learn that his sire is a more prominent venture by the name of Gaetan de Corriveau, and he's a much more successful entrepreneur who has made occasional visits to the town of Bristol, the city of Bristol. You don't know as much about him except that people seem to give him a bit of respect. You learn about the gangrel named Amber. She's a very nebulous creature. No one's entirely sure how old she is or if that's even her real name, but it's the name that she gives. She often takes the wolf form of golden fur rather than as a person. She communicates to people from this form, which can be a bit disconcerting depending on who's watching. She always has this golden fur with this reddish hue, at least under certain lighting. But she's a true mercenary. She's loyal to apparently no one except for when people hire her, either for tutoring or offerings of blood or shelter or future boons, scouting work. She's been used in a lot of different ways, and she seems always to return only to her own loyalty. You learn about the secretive Cappadocian Hezekiah. He's very reclusive. He's something of a scholar, you learn, and he keeps mostly to himself in this monastery just outside of town. You know that he is in contact with another Canaanite in town named Tybalt, but otherwise doesn't really speak to anyone. Apparently he's a great scholar, though he doesn't do much to prove that the nights you learn him. Tybalt is a Bruja you meet. He seems one of the more easier to meet. He's one of the more easier to like, certainly more sociable. You learn in bits and pieces. He was once a priest rising through the ranks before he was embraced. And he seems to still try to do what he can to protect pilgrims and Christians from the depredations of other Canaanites. And even through talking to him, you learn he has some powerful connections in London with the prince there. He's probably one of the more noble in this city. As for Kincaid and his two companions, as it were, that's a bit more difficult to learn about, as Ithra and Emmanuel never leave during this time period, and you are invited individually. You yourself are invited to one of Kincaid's banquets. Do you accept?
While this would be a great learning opportunity, her sire has advised her against it for good reason, and she will heed his advice.
That being the case, you learn next to nothing about Kincaid, except for what your sire is going to tell you. And Pete tells you mostly what he already told you, that it is believed he is of the Clan of the Rose. No one's entirely sure how old he is, but he's been the Prince of Bristol for longer than anyone here knows, or before anyone here has arrived in Bristol. And his feasts are always on... He has a few a year. They are either on a new moon, the harvest moon, or All Hallows Eve. I'm sorry, new moon's lunar eclipse and All Hallows Eve. These are generally the times that he invites mostly kine. Of course, invitations go out, say Canaanites, but the locals here never accept anymore. So the kine go, and it's usually expected that one or two will go missing. It's usually people passing through town, travelers, merchants, the occasional priest. No one of great note or nobility or status that would be noticed, and he never seems to make any of the local nobles disappear. But it's suspicious enough that most of the other Canaanites seem to agree that they will not attend his parties either. And that is what you learn with all of your successes. You also become a bit of, just by being a fly on the wall, you do, pick up the notice. People know who you are. Not so much about you, but you're a known quantity on some level. You're not a complete stranger anymore. Anything else you want to do over these 20-odd years? Sorry, am I muted?
No, you're not. Ghouls are something that still need permission to have, correct?
Who are you
Because
asking?
I'm aware in modern nights, schools need permission in order to create.
There's no hard and fast rule that you've been able to tell. It depends on who you ask. If you ask your sire, you ask the prince.
She would ask her sire as a... Oh, sorry. The push to talk button ended up getting deactivated there for a minute. She would ask her sire as approaching it from more of a keeping an eye out during the day type thing. Gathering information where she cannot.
Your sire tells you that Kincaid has never been very heavy-handed on permission for ghouls, and in part you get the impression that no one really wants to test his limits because no one's really sure what he's about. So no one's really gone overboard with ghouling a mercenary army or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
At your interest of having a retainer for the day, he does suggest one of his own servant girls, one of his own maids, in a similar position that you once were in, that he was actually thinking of ghouling himself. It's a young woman by the name of Gertrude de Ville, and she tends to the household affairs of Volanus, and at times she also plays the simple role of maidservant, but mostly she seems to be managing the staff. And he points out to you that she seems to be very effective at picking up on discontent and rumor in the household, which has resulted in one other maid losing her hand for theft, and a stable boy being quietly replaced after he found out a bit too much about Volanus. So she seems to be very canny on these kinds of things, and he told you that he was going to ghoul her, but he would offer Gertrude to you for a small boon.
If it would not be stepping on your toes to do so, then...
For a small boon, not at all.
Alright. That's how she gets a retainer, then.
Good, because I picked out the portrait already. Alright. So you now have, over enough time when she becomes under your employ. You gain Gertrude as your ghoul. You still have I would say a good amount of space in this 20 years to do anything else. Do you try and maintain any connection to your family?
No.
Alright. Well, this time passes, and in the year 1381, under the great burden of high taxation, an already overworked and weakened lower class is battered by plague and strife, and feebly tries to recover, while the 100 Years' War further depletes the country of men. The tensions result in the Peasants' Revolt, and London becomes very dangerous, you hear, for the upper class, even forcing the young king into the Tower of London for his own safety. The revolt is put down, despite the influence of some upstart brouhaha neonate, but the chaos and terror to the nobility and aristocracy is felt very sharply, as not even in London can it be ignored, this disparity of classes, the problems of the country in a microcosm. Does Elined have any reaction to this outcry from the lower class?
More of a lament on the fact that if the lower classes here are acting up so much, then it's only a matter of time before her own people by blood, the Welsh, end up acting up again as well.
Perhaps so. It's also around this time that you become aware that the Bristol Prince, Kincaid, has become involved in some greater organization of princes across England, forming a group called the Covenant. You hear Kincaid speaks of this covenant very highly at court, promising to bring order and stability across England with this council of equals, instead of a dominant lord, as the Lord of England Adam once did before he was destroyed just 20 or 30 years ago. This collection of elders comes to rule most of the lands of England through proxy smaller vassal fiefs like Exeter to your west, Anglesey in Wales, and Dublin in Ireland. And through the grapevine you learn one of the other 6 Covenant princes is a young girl named Octavia, which seems to anger your sire greatly, though he does not explain why.
All right.
Perhaps also of note, the Ventru Gaetan de Corriveau starts making the occasional visit to the city of Bristol, and you learn that he is actually part of this group called the Gauntlet, some enforcing body sent out by the Covenant to negotiate problems that arise across England that are of some significance to its stability. Another 20 years passes, and you have time to further whatever plans you may have.
Well, if there is need for a tactician, she will offer her skills. Though, admittedly, she is not a military-trained one, with no experience at the sword herself.
Your sire hears, well, how much do you let your sire know that you're looking to flex your military muscle?
Well, she wouldn't hide it from him.
Your sire tells you that although he appreciates your clear skill and natural talent with grasping these ideas, that it can be a tough sell, first of all, to get a woman in command or advising men in matters of warfare, and so it's difficult to find positions for you to get that experience. Although he advises you, you may either try and start or perhaps join a mercenary group, and perhaps over time you might gain some experience there.
Well, that would give some experience, so that does sound like a good option. So, the Gangrel woman, do I know if she's attached to any mercenary organization, or is it just her?
She's a bit odd. Amber, this mercenary gangrel, keeps a half-dozen other wolves in her haven in the ruins of this tavern outside of Gloucester. And you haven't seen her really work with other people unless she's leading them, although you do know where to find her. It's not like she has a band of soldiers, though, per se.
True.
Of course, your sire does point out that with the 100 Years' War going on, there's no shortage of would-be mercenary captains starting up in taverns and other areas where people are looking for work and trying to join up, as the English are relying heavily on paid mercenaries right now.
Alright. She'll keep an eye out and see if she notices any at these locations.
It doesn't take long, maybe a few months, before, just by keeping an ear to the ground, so to speak, you catch wind of one mercenary captain who is putting a group together. He's already got about 150 men. He's looking to take another 50 on. And so he's going around before heading back to York, to the ports, to sail off to France. He's looking for able-bodied men. That's what he says. Of course, it's just assumed right now that no women are going to be joining this. So that's probably the greatest challenge you face.
That is the greatest challenge she faces. So, she would approach him and ask him if he would like to... Well, in the medieval times, what games of tactics do they have?
What games of tactics?
Yes, as a way to show at least some form of tactical prowess outside of just the basic chess. Any, like, battle simulation things. Well, simulation is a bit of an advanced term for it, but point still stands.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Chess would be the go-to. Card games are just starting to pop up, but they're not so much about tactics as, more general wiles and some luck. So you're going up to him, and what do you initially say to him, or how do you sell yourself here?
Okay. It is a pleasure to meet you, but... and I am aware this is quite on the... unusual side, but... if you would like, I do have some know-how in tactics, and if you would like to test that, I can prove myself.
The man looks to you, and there's a few other of his men around as they listen to you, and they all have, mugs of ale. Is that right? You have some tactics.
She nods.
Alright, I'm drunk enough for this. What kind of tactics do you have, miss? He sets his ale down.
She would go on in detail, going over the various things she's learned over her studies. Of course, not enough time to go over every single little thing, but a general overview with giving enough information to let it be known that she is knowledgeable in the subject.
Alright. I'll let you make I would say this is... I'll put this in two parts because it's kind of more than one domain. You have to sell him on this idea, but you have to come up with the ideas too on the spot. So give me an intelligence academics to come up with these ideas. Things you might be relevant to mercenaries and what they face.
5 successes.
Alright. And that's very... So when he starts asking you, you immediately come up with some scenarios that would be very applicable to him. Now you have to sell those to him. And so for that, I'll let you take those 5 successes and add it to a manipulation expression. Roll difficulty 7.
don't believe I have expressions that minuses 1 from it.
It's a talent, so there's no penalty.
Okay.
You can try it, talents, even if you have no talent in it. Difficulty 7, though. So
difficulty 7. That'd be -1, so that'd be 4.
Okay, still very successful. 4 successes. So, by the end of it, he's no longer laughing. All he does is take another drink, and he's looking at you more seriously. And, what company did you serve before this? Mrs., what did you say your name was?
Elined.
Mrs. Elined. Where'd you pick this up?
Oh, I just have a knack for it, and I've overheard a few things here and there.
My boss, those ideas, they seem pretty good. Hey, shut up! He kind of smacks one of these guys, starts talking up to him. Alright, alright. You pick things up, huh?
She nods.
He seems to size you up. You look like the wind to blow you over. You ever held a sword before?
Unfortunately, no.
He smirks.
But my talents more lie with the pursuits of coming up with ideas instead of enacting them myself.
How convenient. Me and my men, we're going out tomorrow morning. You are welcome to join us. For now. We ride out at dawn. We've got a ways to go for York. There's a number of inns along the way. I'm going to try and recruit a few on the way over there. But I'm going to pay you half of what I pay new hires. Since you ain't never held a sword before, you got some ideas I think might be useful. But that ain't no use if you can't self-do anything but that sword. He kind of points at you.
Of course. And she bows and says, it is such an honor to be bestowed a position considering... Well, let's just say we both know women tacticians aren't exactly, common.
And, we're all good on horses, so, hope you have your own, or perhaps you might, do a favor for one of me or my men. Perhaps you can join me on my horse, eh? And he smiles at you lasciviously.
Well, that... She pauses for a moment. It's that. That would be a bit on the improper side. It would make a few people talk. However, I will see what I can scrounge up.
Well, my rooms are last on the left in case you can't scrounge anything up by tomorrow morning. Like I said, we ride out at dawn. I won't wait for you.
Alright. With that, she gives one last bow and bids them farewell. And roughly how much does a horse cost?
Without getting into nitty-gritty of this many coins of silver and pence, which I hate to
This is more of a, can I buy it with 2 resources?
Excellent question. And one, I'm going to consult my own little house rules on this, because I was thinking about this beforehand. Let's see. I'll let you roll your resources at difficulty 7. It's going to be a stretch for the amount of money you have in the employ, or having been employed previously, and the stipend you've been provided through your sire. So it's not much, but it's not impossible. Alright, 1 success. You managed to scrounge it up barely. If it cost a cent more, a pence more, then it would not be an option. But the stables, the prices here, and you can get by this one time. You can get a horse. It's not going to be a great horse. It's not going to be a war horse, certainly, but it will do. The bigger problem you realize is they're riding out at dawn.
Yes, that.
How do you riddle that one out?
Well, they mentioned where they were going.
Mm-hmm.
So, either I find a more nocturnal one, or I can meet them along the way. After all, do I know the state of the Court of the Roses and the European one? Because in the book, I know the two of them don't exactly see eye to eye.
Like the Court of Love, like in France?
Yes.
I'm not married to that canon, so I wouldn't worry too much about what you've read there, haven't read there. Your question is, how do English Canaanites look at French Canaanites right now?
Mm-hmm.
In general? You would know that the English Canaanites, the ones in power in England, are invested on some level. You're not sure what level. They are invested in the 100 Years' War, obviously in favor of England. You don't know if it's just through coin, or if indeed there are Canaanites out there fighting on behalf of England. It's just kind of not your wheelhouse. It's not your social sphere.
All right.
Again, it depends on, ask Kincaid about it. If you ask your sire, if you ask the people, the Canaanites of Bristol, you'll get different answers. You'll also show you're asking about it.
I would also show him asking about it.
Maybe you don't care.
True. Well, since there are Canaanites involved with this, would I know if it would curry favor with the powers that be should I go forward with this?
If you succeed, definitely.
Then I might need to have a talk with one of said powers to get something arranged. She will talk to Kincaid about going forth for such things, since doing so would bring some amount of respect to him should she succeed.
He tells you that he is supporting, and this is at court, he tells you he is supporting a number of his ghoul lieutenants and a handful of Canaanites involved in some of the skirmishes out in continental Europe, in Normandy and in those areas. He is willing to back you if you want to help. He just doesn't believe you're going to be very much help. So he doesn't offer a whole lot, although he is willing to, he's willing to give you a carriage if you wanted your ghoul to help move you about, as that's one of the most reliable ways that his Canaanites have been keeping up with the armies. Kind of like as luggage.
All right. And does he ask for anything in return?
He's not giving you very much. He's not even giving you a horse. He's just giving you basically an empty carriage that you'd... it's really not that much.
Okay.
So... He's basically giving you his blessing and very little else. He doesn't expect much from you, so he's not giving you much.
Okay, yeah, that's suitable considering the time period. So she will thank him and promises that she will do everything she can to prove that this wasn't a waste.
He just seems to smile amused at that. He's not taking you seriously at all, you can tell that. But perhaps you'll prove him wrong. What do you mean to do with your carriage?
So, do I know if this carriage is... Can my, as cheap as I can get horse pull this thing?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Are you bringing...
It's not one of those little riding horses that can't pull anything. Good.
No, it's a fairly strong horse. Are you bringing Gertrude?
Yes, I will retrieve Gertrude and get things arranged to ride out.
You tell her what's going on, your plans and everything?
Yes, I inform her as to my plans.
She does admit her great anxiety about following a mercenary army of men, being the two only women. From what she's heard, that does not generally go well for women. They're not treated very well.
Well, that may be true, but after they see what we can be capable of, that might change for our group.
She still seems very anxious. She agrees to help you, of course. She's going to do everything she can, but she seems more worried, probably for herself, without you to help her, like during the day.
Alright, she has... Her main skill is... Well, do I know what discipline she picked for her main thing?
Gertrude?
Yep. As ghouls, since I know ghouls all get one free dot.
She hasn't really manifested anything. She didn't really pick it. It's more just... You've seen her be pretty strong in the past. You think perhaps she's developed preternatural strength, but nothing extremely supernatural otherwise. She's probably less than 20 years under your blood now. So she knows about Canaanites and about how ghouls develop, but she's still fairly young.
Alright. For her own safety, it's probably best that she has some form of dominate.
She certainly wishes she had your power. But those gifts just don't manifest quite as readily for ghouls. At least not one so young. Walk me through Elined's mindset as someone on the road of kings, having eschewed your humanity. What's your concern for Gertrude?
Well, I know she's already a step above the mercenaries as per ranking, and as such should not be pushed around by them. Furthermore, what is a puppy? Furthermore, she needs some form as to enforce herself to keep them from doing anything they should not outside their own ranking.
Okay, fair enough. So you make your way, carriage and horse and Gertrude, out to York. It takes a few weeks. You have to stop a couple of times just to get a little bit more food for the travels, more for Gertrude and your horse than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And you reach York, and you do eventually find the mercenary captain again, whose name is George Durand. Captain Durand. He finds you again, and you get some curious looks as to why you didn't ride out with them and why you met them here.
My apologies. I had to get some things in order.
Right. Well, I imagine there won't be much to be getting in order when you're on that boat, I hope.
Of course.
Now, you might be smart, but that's nothing if you're not reliable.
I wholeheartedly agree with this.
Couldn't help but notice you brought a friend. What's her name?
Yes, Gertrude. She drives my carriage and she tends to my horse.
And he starts to smile. Would she mind tending to my horse once in a while?
I do believe we have other matters that are more important. But she should not do such things. It is quite unseemly for a young lady to act in such a way.
Well, excuse me, Your Highness. I had no idea we were in the presence of such elevated status of societal peoples and such. And he does this big elaborate bow. I hope for her sake she's not so rigid in her thinking. The men, they're not always as pleasant and civil as I am.
That is unfortunate. That is most unfortunate, but...
Don't worry, my dear, I'm sure she'll be welcome right at home among the men. At that point, he breaks off the conversation unless you force the issue again.
One moment.
Sure.
Would commanding him as to not allow his men to do such things to herself or Gertrude be above the effects of command?
Yes. Command would be like, sit, or
Yes,
stop.
either.
Pretty simple stuff. What you want is not outside the realm of dominate, just your command of dominate.
Yes, I am aware.
You know, the next day you are setting off aboard the ship, meaning to head to Europe, to France.
Mm-hmm.
And it's around the 13...
Mesmerize?
What's that?
More powerful than mesmerize. Or would mesmerize get it done?
Let me review. I have not looked at this in some time.
Yeah, that's why I was flipping open the book. I haven't done Dominate clans in quite some time.
Oh, subjugation, level 2.
It's called Mesmerize in the Dark Ages core rulebook, but
I have it in Dark Ages V20. It's subjugation.
oh, it is? Huh.
Yeah, we're using DA V20. Anyway, it's just semantics. I'll look it over.
I have it too. It's just, I guess I downloaded one of the older ones when I was, forgot to get one of the newer ones from when it was officially released. It was more of a backers got earlier things. Fun.
So it's still a set of instructions. It can be a more complicated set of instructions, like instead of sit, it's, go into the galley of the ship and sit. But to repeatedly instruct his men to not bother you or Gertrude, that'd be more like conditioning, level 4. Well, not so much. I don't know, I could be sold on this. So if you wanted to phrase it as, more specifically, tell your men to leave me and my woman alone over the next few days, you could try that.
Yes.
It's a little bit more specific, but still complicated. Yeah, I'll let you try that.
Alright.
So I'll have you do manipulation leadership, and your successes will be how strong it takes.
Okay, so what's the difficulty since it goes off of his willpower?
5.
That would be 3 successes.
3 successes. That's a pretty strong impression. And after spending enough time talking to him and giving him this command, you feel more confident that he is going to instruct his men to leave you and your ghoul alone. You feel like this is definitely set well within him. He's probably going to do this a few times over the next week. I don't want to get too bogged down in mechanics in the Prelude anyway.
Yeah.
So, yes. That works fine. So you sail out with your horse and your carriage and your ghoul with these men. Of course, you only come out at night, which is a little strange, but no one really bats an eye, especially as it seems like you're getting a little bit more berth, a little bit more space. After the first couple of nights, it's as though you have an increasing radius of isolation. You suspect that your gifts have succeeded. And your ghoul, Gertrude, seems to report feeling pretty isolated from the men as well. Let me review the time periods. This is the 1380s, roughly. Let's see. So you end up joining this mercenary band as they follow John of Gaunt and the Duke of Brittany as they take 30,000 horses and march south on a chevauchée. It's fairly unsuccessful overall, but there are a few times for you to show your worth. Go ahead and we'll do a wits academics to make use of your wiles more in the moment and making use of your training and your studies in real combat. Alright.
Not nearly well enough.
One success. So, it's nothing spectacular, but you do manage to advise Captain Durand of a few decisions. You convince him otherwise, and it ends up saving some men, and he seems to give you a little bit of appreciation, a little bit more respect now that you're actually doing something. You're actually finally proving your value on this, although it's somewhat fleeting. He's at least listening to you. And so John of Gaunt and Duke of Brittany, after unsuccessful raids going south into France, they retreat south to Gascony and end up losing half of their men. That's not your fault. That's more on the larger scale of things. Your mercenary band holds up fairly well. Do you try and engage in any of the combat during this time yourself? Because there are a few night raids.
That would go abysmally.
Alright, so no hand-to-hand combat for Elined.
Yeah, I don't have melee.
Well, you're in the right group to learn. But if you don't, you don't.
It will be something she will attempt to pick up during her travels as a just in case. But it is definitely not her go-to.
I would say that in the company of this group and at the side of Captain Durand, it's hard to not learn something about hand-to-hand combat. So I'll gift you a dot of melee simply from your exposure, and you do have a few chances to learn here and there. The men, especially the men whose lives you ended up saving, are more willing to teach you something about melee, about fighting. And so you do learn the bare basics of it, even if you don't involve yourself very much. So you manage to spend some time with this mercenary company, and they end up returning to England, mostly in peace, and at least in some part due to you. And so you're paid a very meager amount of coin, nothing significant at all, because even the new hire soldiers would not have been paid very much, and you're paid half of that.
Mm-hmm.
So you return with a bit more experience, a little bit of exposure to real combat under your belt, and Captain Durand tells you that he actually would not mind if you joined him on other excursions, other trips out, but at least for now it seems the 100 Years' War is taking a pause as the Black Prince returns to England in failing health. He dies. He's actually already passed away by this point, but his father, King Edward III, dies very soon after, and The professional French troops push most of the English out, leaving only Calais. So there is a push out of the English, and shortly after that, that's when you hear about the Peasants' Revolt. And there's a peace at the end in 1389. There's a peace, and a 3-year truce is signed between France and England. So there's no need for mercenaries during a few of these years. Do you intend to... I mean, the time passes by, though, and Captain Durand goes back to Bristol. He actually seeks you out when it becomes evident that new campaigns are forming up. Are you going to return with him?
How many years have passed?
It's now 1392. It's been, we'll say, around 5 years.
Alright, so it wouldn't be too odd that there hasn't been much fiscal change.
No, not right now.
Okay. So she will set out once more.
Alright. You're still being paid half of what most men are paid, most because it's hard for him to justify to other men why he'd be paying a woman to serve with him.
That's understandable. At least until she makes a name for herself.
Mm-hmm. All right. Oh, actually, the second piece lasts for quite a while longer than I realized. It's going to last until 1415. And Captain Durand is going to be quite a bit older. Let me think. Yeah. Although there are other conflicts that do come up. So more broadly speaking, not so much in the 100 Years' War, but he does come to find you for other work, as
Alright.
there's always conflict in mainland Europe. So this time you'd be going further south and east. Of course, he tells you that up front in case you don't want to go that far from England.
And this would last...
Probably, I mean, most mercenary contracts last for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
But going so far, he tells you he plans to be in mainland Europe for a few years, because traveling back and forth to England, he's a mercenary, he travels for money.
Alright. So long as it... But it shouldn't raise any questions, so... Experience is experience.
Mostly his campaigns will be taking him east in the areas of the Holy Roman Empire, as there seems always to be some group that's having problems and some other group that's going to pay them.
Ooh, so her other language might actually come in handy.
Possibly.
Yes, if he expresses that he's going to the Holy Roman Empire, she will mention that she does have knowledge of Middle Saxon. she will be able to decipher what at least some people are saying.
He's a bit surprised to hear that, but welcome to it. And so you join him for a few more campaigns. Mostly it's lesser nobles trying to settle feuds. Go ahead and roll your wits and academics again to advise Captain Durand. Oh wow, that's
6 successes.
Yeah. You're much more successful this round in this campaign. And not only do you save lives, but you are indirectly responsible for having this mercenary band of around 500 men now make a much more significant impact in some of these battles than many would suspect, because your group is kind of being attached to armies of 2,000 to 3,000, but your band is creating overwhelming victories through flanks that no one had thought of, or in directions and ways no one had planned for. And Captain Durand, he gains a lot of notoriety for his band of mercenaries. You gain no status at all. No one even knows you exist. But you do end up with a sizable increase in the coin you're getting, simply because throughout these few years you're being paid more and more as your victories are incredible. The mercenary band of Captain Durand becomes a name brand. People are looking to hire him because they assume he is the one making these decisions and coming up with these plans that are incredible. And so, because you earn so much coin, because he actually pays attention to what you're saying and starts paying you for what you're worth, he's worried you're going to go to someone else. So he starts paying you a lot more. And after several years of this, you can add a dot of resources for the amount of loot and coin you've earned and gained from successful plunder. And at the end of this, the contracts end, and he actually tells you he didn't ever expect to make this much silver. He thought he would die, as many mercenary captains do, in battle, penniless. But with the amount of money he's made, he wants to stop fighting. He wants to basically, buy a farm and live out his days. He's getting old. He can't fight forever, and he thinks with the money he has, he could live out his days pretty nicely at some cottage. So he's giving up the mercenary life.
It will be a shame to see such a great captain go, but I fully understand your desires to retire.
He thanks you all the same, and you're spared any more sexist innuendos or remarks, which is rare for him. And you depart from Captain Durand. Last you see of him is him riding off on his own, intent on buying one of these cottages deep in the motherland.
Mm-hmm. By any chance has the prince heard of my exploits, since he was aware of whom and where I was going to?
Kincaid?
Yes.
It's unlikely he would know it was you. He might even know that there are successful bands of mercenaries in mainland Europe, because right now there's a peace, and he's not tracking very much on the problems of the Holy Roman Empire or anyone else in the area. So it would have to be the kind of thing where you'd have to show him something, or other people would have to report this.
What of note have I been presented as, things gained through work and conquest? that could be presented as a sign of this and as a sign of thanks for lending the carriage early on.
Let me think. I'm just looking over some maps right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking more broadly, there was a change in the ownership of a county which led to the elevation of a count to a duke, and the principal battle that happened was due to this band of mercenaries which you were advising, and it was due to your plans that this happened. So indirectly you're the reason a count became a duke in actually Hungary at the time. That's where you were. The duke's name was Loren Suljak. Technically a voivode, but equivalent to a duke. So you have that claim to fame, if you wish to press it.
Yes, but are the trinkets from battle simply coin or objects?
There are some objects as well. You gained some plunder from it. Your group was too successful to not have plunder, and...
Yes, I was more looking for an object of plunder I could return to him as thanks for lending the carriage early on. That would hint towards the area without outright bragging about it.
Sure. You come across, one of the pieces of plunder that's very notable in the area. It's a golden kind of armlet or wristlet that is fairly heavy. You think it's quite pure gold, and it probably belonged to one of these nobles that you indirectly helped kill. It must be worth quite a bit. It certainly draws attention if you wear it. It even has some inscriptions in Hungarian languages.
Which I unfortunately cannot read.
I mean, you can't read it, but it's there.
It is there.
Sure looks Hungarian.
Sure looks Hungarian from that time I was in Hungary. Anyways, she would present that to the prince as thanks for helping her out early on in her years as a formal tactician.
He's very surprised at this gift and seems to recognize immediately the language. And he asks where you got this.
Oh, it was down in Hungary in, do I know the name of the county or whatever jurisdiction?
Yes. That would be... This map is tiny. It is from the area known as Tachabanya.
Mm-hmm. There was a bit of a squabble between some nobles in Tatabanwa.
And you participated
I did.
in this? How?
I did as I said I would years ago, and I advised the same general I set out with beforehand, as tactician.
You mean that brawler that came through town?
Yes.
I had heard of some feuding going on in the east beyond the Holy Roman Empire. I did not think that you would be involved in that.
To be completely honest, I did not think I would go that far east myself. At least not before hearing about it.
In truth, I did not know who was involved, except that there was some elevation to a duke.
Yes, Lauren Socek. He is... Yes, he is equivalent of a duke in Hungary now.
Most impressive.
And this armlet belonged to one of the unfortunate nobles that did not survive the altercation.
Well, I'm very grateful for the gift. I'm very impressed with your skills.
She bows and says, "Thank you very much, my liege."
He seems to turn it over in his hand, studying it, and then looking to you. He kind of gestures for you to go.
She shall.
Alright, having made perhaps a better impression on Prince Kincaid, you leave his court, and time continues to move forward. What does Elined plan to do over the next 10 to 15 years?
10 to 15 years. Is this coming to a close on the...
The peace? Yes.
Yes. With it coming to a close, she does need to study and at least attempt to pick out some rudimentary levels of French as to at least understand any messages should they pop up.
Alright, that's more than enough time to study and learn French. Being in England, you learn that it's really just the common, being outside of Anglesey, I should say, it's really just the low folk who use this Middle English language. Most, including Kincaid and your sire, most are speaking in French. Anybody of any status is speaking in French, really. And being surrounded by it and actually trying to learn it, it doesn't take long for you to pick up on it.
Alright.
Okay, let me just look over my timeline. So the second piece does last until about 1415. During this time, another event occurs. Another rebellion breaks out at the turn of the century from the Welsh, not far from your home, in their last desperate struggle for independence, led by a man named Owen Glyndwr, the nominal Prince of Wales. The ensuing conflict tears apart the Western Midlands.
I know the Welsh area. Well, not the entire country, because who could know the entire country, but I know the people. I know, well, the typical outlook of the people. I know the language.
So you know that raids and armies are destroying towns and the fragile economy of your home is being torn up. Do you have any thoughts on this or any sympathy remaining? Or is this behind you now?
This is, in fact, behind her. However, it is another chance to show at least some military power. To at least quell this before it gets too out of hand, before too much damage is done.
So you're going to try and help put down the Welsh? Is that correct?
That would be the intent, to try to help the side that I am currently on, because Bristol's in England. Could threaten the security of where she is currently staying.
Absolutely. You bring this up to Prince Kincaid?
Yes.
I'm more willing to hear you out, given that you do have some claim to success now. He agrees to send you out with the forces that the Covenant has actually raised, and they seem to be led by a Bruja, one of the Gauntlet. His name is Siegfried. He seems to be a knight. Excuse me. Seems to be a chivalric knight and commander of men, apparently a great warrior. And his status in the Gauntlet is respected, so the Covenant has dispatched him to help bring peace to Wales by suppressing this rebellion, and you're invited to join him as an advisor.
She will go along.
All right,
and of course, thank the prince for such a great opportunity.
You're not afforded a great amount of respect from Siegfried. He seems to believe he can put this down easily without any advice, especially from someone like you. But given that a Prince of the Covenant sends you, he feels obliged to at least hear you out. So go ahead and I'll take another wits academics to come up with some plans for putting this rebellion down more quickly than it would be.
That's another 6.
Yep. You're doing very well in this domain. You seem to have found a rhythm. There are patterns in warfare you identify it, whether it's in Hungary or France or Wales. Men are men, and although the tactics might change, you know how to take advantage of things like terrain and morale. And not just in one battle or several raids, but over the expanse of this rebellion, you're able to curtail the raids, and it's because of your involvement that Owen Glyndwr is stopped before he can do more damage. He is brought down in one of these unsuccessful raids in 1415, and a lot of the credit is because you were in charge of setting up some of these moving forces in the area to stop him from escaping, as Owen Glyndwr was notoriously difficult to catch. And his forces and his men were difficult to catch. They always seemed to get away. And you managed to catch his army in one of these raids that otherwise would have been a success. And his army is devastated. The leaders that were with him, the other commanders and lieutenants, the biggest names in the Welsh rebellion, are captured and executed. Owen Glyndwr himself does escape at the last moment, but the rebellion is put down, and despite himself, Siegfried has to report back that you were very important in many of the plans across over really 15 years of these campaigns to stop the Welsh and to put them down. And you gain quite a bit more notice, especially from Kincaid, for your involvement in helping put down the Welsh rebellion. Of course, Wales is devastated. It'll be a century or more before they recover from all of this.
Of course, but that is the nature of war. The losing side is always devastated.
Of course, that's no concern to you anymore. And by April of 1415, your sire now comes to you with a proposition. It sounds as though King Henry V has won the support of the Great Council to sanction renewed fighting with France after the truce has ended. This peace is ending. The king intends to land on the shores of northern France at the end of summer after he rallies his armies. Volanus tells you that both he and Kincaid have vested interest in seeing this succeed, but Kincaid's ghoul lieutenants and advisors have actually died at sea. Their ship has sunk. Or lost, no one knows, but they're gone. They're in need of military leaders and tacticians, in any case. And if you agree to aid Kincaid, he will owe you a favor.
She will agree wholeheartedly.
And with the status and notoriety you're gaining, it's not hard to sell you on joining up with the other Cainite officers that accompany this army. So you reach Henry V's army and join up with the other leaders and agents appointed by the Covenant, whom you learn are deeply invested in the success of the war. One of these agents you've already met, the Brujah Siegfried, the knight and commander, but you also meet another member of the Gauntlet, a Malkavian by the name of Wulfric, whom you learn is a Dane with some roguish qualities. And the two of them seem very different sorts of people, but appear to fight very hard together when you make landfall and besiege and then take the port town of Harfleur. Although they seem confident commanders and warriors, you deduce that neither have excellent aptitude for large battle strategy, and you yourself saw that Siegfried, if it weren't for you, he would have had a much messier plan for Wales that might have lasted longer and taken longer. Do you try and socialize or get to know these two men with more time to meet them?
Yes, I need to get to know who I'm working with.
Okay.
And there goes the dog about the fireworks again. Hold on a minute, I'm gonna go put him in another room. I'm back. You might still hear him should he start barking again, but he is in another room, so he's nowhere near as loud.
That's fine, we'll make do.
This happens around the 4th of July.
Yeah. Just by spending time with these two members of the Gauntlet, Wulfric and Siegfried, you learn that Siegfried is a very chivalric man. He's very courteous to women. He is very much an honorable man and very ruthless in warfare. Wulfric is Dane by tradition and culture, and you can, by speaking with him, he tells you of how he was once a raider coming out of the Viking tales of old, which would put him at quite an old age. You're not sure exactly when he's referencing, but he at least claims to be of Viking descent, and he fights like it. They also speak of the other members of the Gauntlet to you, of Gaetan de Corvo and Wilfrith of Lancaster, and how they seem to be less on the commanding or violent side. They seem to be more on the business and negotiation side of things. But altogether, the Gauntlet seems to work very well. A balance of skill sets, and they seem to accomplish many things working together. You also learn that, for whatever reason, it seems like Wulfric has some distaste for the Prince of York, Ragna, whom you've never met, but he doesn't seem to have much good to say about her. As you sail with them, you eventually make landfall, and you find that the English army is about 12,000 strong, but you realize the grand majority is made up of longbowmen and archers. The group of you are protected in covered wagons during the day as you march with the men at a pace of about 15 miles a day for 2 weeks, which is quite grueling. And you also learn during this time that your army is being shadowed by a growing army of French soldiers. And it seems that more and more French nobles are joining with their own men night after night. Things seem bleak as they block the way back to the safety of English-held Calais when the king tries to make a tactical retreat back to safer territory. You're caught on open ground. Finally, on this night, 2.5 weeks in, your army is encamped on open ground, and you hear from Wulfric after his scouting that the French Cainites among the French army are mustering the men, and they're preparing for an attack at night. The English army is outnumbered 2-1. They must have over 20,000. And even worse, King Henry V is ill and febrile. He's unable to lead. His mortal lieutenants are in disarray, as well as both Wulfric and Siegfried. They're all arguing over the best allotment of resources and troops, and the attack is likely to come within hours of now. What do you do?
Well, the bickering will clearly get us nowhere. I will assess the situation and try to take in what would be the best course of action.
And from there, do my damnedest to try to convince them of that.
Okay. Assessing the terrain and putting together plans with what you know about the soldiers, I'll give you a perception academics to make an assessment and come up with some plans here. And I'll give you difficulty, standard difficulty.
Would detail-oriented work for this?
Yes, I will say it will. Sorry, did you roll? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's 8 successes with your 10s, with your specialty. You come up with a very simple but very grounded plan that seems to have escaped many of these men. And the mortal lieutenants are busy arguing, and you manage to get Siegfried's attention. He'll at least listen to you because of your success in Wales. And you grab him and you talk about your ideas and what you've seen of the terrain with a keen mind for Henry V's army and the kinds of soldiers he has. In the open terrain, the very deep and muddy ground, it was just rained. It's very difficult to walk through. You put forward an idea of forming the men-at-arms in the central vanguard, flanked by longbowmen and supported by upright stakes to hold off the cavalry. It's better and more organized. It's simpler than these grand ideas the others are presenting. And Siegfried quickly sees this could be the greatest idea of all in its simplicity and its straightforward nature, relying on the longbow, which has proved success in Crécy and Poitiers. He champions your idea, which is then backed by Wulfric, and with the inspiring words that only a Bruja could give, he sells your ideas to the lieutenants, and he begins organizing men into rank as you described. The archers prepare stakes, and the soldiers move quickly to prepare, and battle is about to begin. What do you do as the battle is about to begin, or what will you do?
Well, she still has her sword if times come for it, but hopefully things will not get nearly that close.
Do you mean to try and engage melee?
No, I mean, she's keeping it at her side as a just-in-case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But She is intending on trying to keep an eye out for any changes, any alterations that could have a effect on things. Try to keep a watch on the environment, the enemies, try to see if there's anything else that could be manipulated to their advantage.
Alright. So you stay in the back lines with the commanders, with the lieutenants. Siegfried himself joins the battle, as does Wulfric. And your strategy wins the night. The deep and wet mud traps French knights in their heavy armor up to their knees as they approach. The longbowmen rain death down. The tremendous power behind their arrows pierce the mail easily. And by the time the French army meets the English men-at-arms, they're exhausted and they're too concentrated to be of use. The English make quick work of them. The night is won by the English with devastating casualties for the French and staggering numbers of noble deaths, including an archbishop. Siegfried and Wulfric both praise your wit and your quick planning, and you and your army are able to return to Calais and then back to England in November, where King Henry V is hailed as a champion, a returning conqueror. And you learn that much work goes into hiding your involvement from the mortals entirely. And over the next months and even years, a new story is propagated, a new version of the Battle of Agincourt, where King Henry V wasn't sick. He had this great plan and fought hand in hand alongside his soldiers bravely. You learn it's not uncommon for significant battles like this to be led by Cainites, and then later rechronicled, with the heralds concealing any great battles happening at night or supernatural involvement, and in this way, the Cainites are able to hide any inquiring minds. History is written by the victors, after all. At least among the undead, you have gained renown from this victory. You can gain a dot of status, as the Battle of Agincourt will be remembered for a great amount of time, and the princes of the British Isles will know that you were at the head of the strategy that led to its victory. I'll also give you a dot of expression as being able to not just come up with these plans, but convince men to listen to you. You've had a long time of learning how to ply egos and get them to listen to reason, and that requires a certain finesse. So expression is very important. So you know, you are become a little bit more talented at that. How does Elined... So she returns, and Kincaid, he grants her, obviously the minor boon is gone, and he grants you instead a moderate boon. You're very well received coming back to court there. Another 40 years will pass by. How does Elined intend to spend that time?
Let's see. She needs to establish some form of income for herself outside of doing these game of going forth and fighting battles when they appear. While it is profitable, it is... well, it doesn't do any good in times of peace.
So you hope to establish yourself in a different way?
Yes, I at least have something to do in this meantime while she, something to do in the meantime while she's standing at the sidelines, waiting for the next thing to happen.
I mean, the 100 Years' War is still raging. There are still battles to be fought. You don't have to participate in them, but of course now people are asking about you.
Asking about her in which way? To engage or...
There are a number of Canaanites who want you to join the 100 Years' War in favor of England because...
Oh, if there are people that are actively seeking her out for that, she will be more than happy to.
Okay. Yeah, there are many battles to still be fought, and there's a lack of great commanding skill in the English armies and generals. So I will give you just as a general overview of the next 40 years. It becomes much more difficult as the French recoup their losses. But if you want to spend that time in France, in Aquitaine and Normandy, not fighting, but advising, you can absolutely do that. And Canaanites will pay you.
Yes, that is what she will be doing.
Okay. Unless you want something else besides coin. Obviously, there are many things that Canaanites care more about than silver. Or...
This is more about getting her name out there at this point.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I will take...
Well, name out there to Canaanites, not mortals. Mortals don't need to know about this.
Exactly. I will take a Wits Academics difficulty 8. The next 40 years is going to be very difficult for the English, even with you at their side. Wow, 3 successes.
3 successes.
Wow.
I have a hard time convincing anyone of anything, but apparently I am decent at tactics.
Yes.
This is the most success I've seen on a character since my Tremere. At least in one session. The Tremere had a thing about her successes doubling and ended up getting more successes than she had dice. That was weird. Anyways.
Okay. I didn't expect you to be so successful.
I did not expect it to be this successful either.
Let me think
For
about
example,
this.
For example, in my D&D game, I have a ranger character who fails practically every roll that comes her way.
The complication here is that with 3 other simultaneous preludes at this time, history is set, and yet you are breaking it.
Oh, fun!
So I gotta think of how to reconcile that. Okay, so I know how this reconciles.
I broke the canon.
Yeah. No, I know how to reconcile this. Obviously, you're not at every battle the English fight. That's impossible. There are a number of campaigns, there are a number of leaders, but the ones you're involved in are successful. Your leadership, indirectly, your plans and your guidance, save many lives and end many French lives. You're able to keep the army of John Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury, alive much longer. He is credited as being the greatest English general. In truth, it's because of your advising. Through indirect means, you're able to give this mortal man advice on warfare and on the plans of his battle plans. And he is known back home in England as the greatest hope the English have. Unfortunately, the other campaigns fail, and except for John Talbot, the 100 Years' War goes very poorly, as battles and provinces are lost to the French, who now have a professional standing army and reputedly the greatest artillery in the world, as their use of the cannon is now even appearing on refitted cogs alongside archers and crossbowmen. And it's at one of these last battles where you have great success in your command, in your leadership and your guidance. But John Talbot is led astray by his other advisors, who are more persuasive. And even though you have the plans, you have the victory that he needs, he goes against your advice and takes the advice of other lieutenants, forming up against what ends up being a wall-to-wall line of artillery. His army...
I understand you're doing this to get the story to mesh together. But if she knew it was the best idea to go forward with something, she would have tried to at least... If she can't sway him with words, she does have supernatural abilities to sway him. But that said, you're doing this to connect the story, so I will refrain.
Yeah, don't worry. There'll be plenty of chances to change history. You suspect, given that you're no longer a neonate, even if you use, we can even say you do use your gifts, but there's something supernatural pulling him in other directions. You don't think that this is just bad advice winning the day.
Sabotage.
Perhaps even supernatural sabotage. John Talbot's finally killed in the Battle of Castillon near Bordeaux. Despite the plans you offer, he goes with other plans, which lead to his death. And with his death, the loss of Aquitaine to the French. Roll, let's see. I'm gonna have you roll your wit survival, difficulty 7.
There is no specialty.
Alright.
Also, I forgot to ask if I should deduct 1 for not having survival.
Yeah, skills are actually at +1 difficulty, so really be more like difficulty 8. But
Not that really matters.
Yeah, you rolled 10s. So, literally on your wits alone, you are able to survive the calamitous destruction of John Talbot's army, and you are able to escape to Calais, and Calais is still held by the English. It's the only thing left that England holds after the 100 Years' War. And you return to England. It's a grim return. Of course, no one was expecting miracles. The loss of John Talbot is definitely regrettable. The loss of Aquitaine.
Yes, and I've returned with news to my higher-ups that Talbot, as it's technically supposed to be pronounced, sorry, I took photography. Talbot was one of the Talbots was a very renowned inventor of photography. But informed them that Talbot was my higher-ups, the kindred higher-ups, that he was sabotaged, that my supernatural means of persuading him did not work. There was someone else that had a hand at play.
It doesn't seem to surprise anyone at home that this was the case, especially given your record of victories and the victories leading up to that. It's known among the Undead Society that really John Talbot or John Talbot was only as successful as his advisors, and it's actually well received. They expected something like this from the French Cainites, some kind of sabotage of their own leaders at some point. The loss of Aquitaine is still very regrettable, but not altogether expected, or unexpected, I should say. So veterans of the war return to a battered and bittered England, where a highly corrupt circle of dukes and earls now surround a weak and ineffectual King Henry VI. And this group is led by his wife, Queen Margaret of Anjou. All the same, I'll let you get another dot of status since you spent the better part of a century at war, leading to many victories, and at some points you were likely the linchpin in holding the English forces together because of your plans. It may not have lasted 100 years if you hadn't been involved, in fact. So you can take that. And by 1454, as it is now turning this age, the Covenant has held control over England for nearly a century, with the Gauntlet enforcing its will, of which you've met several members. Until you hear of the complete destruction of the Gauntlet, every member dies in March 1454. One and all, some kind of fire or assault on the estate of Gaetan de Corriveau has taken them all, including the knights Siegfried and the Dane Wulfric, whom you fought with. For several weeks, there's a flurry of activity and messengers right here and there, hastily delivering messages, trying to make sense of what's happened, and what is happening and what will happen. Kincaid receives many couriers at this time, but no one else is brought to the estate. And after several weeks of this, you, Elined, are singularly invited to his manor. Alone. Not to court, but to his manor. The one place your sire told you to be careful of.
Well, since they're sending out letters trying to recruit new people, this could prove beneficial in that regard. Though there is a risk, she will... Is this one of those full moon nights? Well, new moon or the lunar eclipse nights?
No.
Okay, so it's not on the days that it is typically done. So this is...
It's not one of the
something
galas or
entirely
anything.
different.
No.
This is something entirely different, so... As such, the nature of it should be different as well. She will attend against the... Well, just to see if this has to do with the grander scheme of things, or if this is something he merely wanted to do himself.
All right. You attend. And perhaps to your surprise, or perhaps not, when you arrive at his manor and find yourself escorted into the large, decadent dining hall made for, you think, several dozen guests, you find Kincaid, and you find your sire. The two of them sitting at the end of the long table, and they both rise when you enter. Emmanuel and Ithra are absent.
She gives a polite smile and Brown says, "It is a pleasure to see you both."
Kincaid bows to you. It is good to see reliable faces in my court, in my manor, at such unreliable times. My thanks for joining me here.
It is my pleasure.
And he gestures to take a seat with them.
She does so.
I expect you've heard the tragic news of our most dedicated gauntlet.
Yes, it is most unfortunate. There are quite a few, two individuals in there that have proven themselves as rather good allies, as the ones I've worked with at least.
He nods. Yes, well, tribulation and chaos outsprings opportunity. While I am disconcerted by this assault, there were none among the former gauntlet whom I felt had my best interest at heart. But perhaps that may now change. And he looks to you quizzitively. Each prince in the Covenant is proposing their nominations to replace the gauntlet, and we are to make decisions in the coming weeks. Villainus here has spoken highly to me of your talents, and I have seen for myself. England has seen for itself the potential you have. Furthermore, there is a strong alliance between my family and yours, and loyalty at this precarious time outweighs valleys of gold. He watches you carefully to weigh your reaction.
She nods her head and says, "Of course, this..." Of course, that...
Sorry, brain.
Of course, having someone that you can rely on is extremely important, more when it comes to seeing your own matters, should they need to be enforced elsewhere.
Your sire joins in, looking to you, folding his arms. Prince Octavia remains on the Covenant by nothing more than sheer fortune, and she will weaken and endanger the entirety of England with her madness. I doubt you've had the chance to meet her. But if you had the status and proximity to her, to undermine her influence and support, the Prince of Canterbury might be replaced by someone more effectual. And he lowers his head, still looking at you with a knowing expression. And you do recall this is the same name of the prince who seemed to vex him before.
She nods, and with that so polite smile,
Her hands now folded in her lap, though that can't really be seen above the table.
she says, "It would be my pleasure. I will do everything I can to keep an eye out for such an opportunity, should I need to."
Kincaid clasps his hands together on the table, looking pleased. As you can see, we are both very interested in your assignment to the gauntlet, and England would be well served if you added your brilliance to this coterie. I shall put forward your name, and in time you will hear word of the decision made by the Covenant.
I thank you, my liege. It is a great honor to be considered for such a position.
He bows his head. You are dismissed from the meeting shortly after and return. Weeks go by before you receive another letter. A summons by the Covenant, inviting you to head east to the town of Salisbury in the county of Wiltshire, at an old cathedral called Old Sarum.
All right.
So you burn the letter?
Sorry, what the connection went a little wonky there.
So do you accept?
Yes.
Oh, good. It's the premise of my story.
No, I do not accept. I will make a whole new character and make this to be delayed a whole nother week.
All right. Do you intend to ride there?
Yes, that does seem the best option as of current.
All right. So you begin riding off in that direction, and you're accompanied by one of Kincaid's men who goes with you, explaining that he'll be needed initially. And at that point, we will pause here, and we will pick this up at the next game session, the first group session.